We are pleased to have two panels of very distinguished witnesses before us today on this important topic. I will now introduce our first witness. Mayor Bill de Blasio is the 109th mayor of New York City. Prior to becoming mayor, Mr. de Blasio served 8 years on the City Council. In 2010, Mr. de Blasio was sworn in as New York City Public Advocate, the second highest citywide elected office. Additionally, Mr. de Blasio served on District 15 School Board in Brooklyn and worked as the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Regional Director for New York and New Jersey area. The witness's full statement will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Mayor de Blasio for 5 minutes. Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Donovan, I want to also congratulate you on behalf of 8.5 million New Yorkers. We're very proud that you've ascended to this role, and it's important to our city, but it's also important to our nation. I want to thank Ranking Member Payne and all the members of the subcommittee. I want to also offer my thanks to Chair McCall, who has been doing so much to protect the security of all Americans, including all of us in New York City. And a special thanks to Congressman King and Congresswoman Rice, who have been regular partners in the work we do protecting New York City. And we all are in this together in the metropolitan area, so I thank you. I do want to also note, Mr. Chair, I want to offer again now publicly my condolences on the passing of your mother, Catherine, and I would just say for the record, she had a lot to be proud of in the work that you've done in public service. I want to thank the subcommittee for this opportunity to speak, and this issue is so important to all of us. I'm proud to be the mayor of America's largest city. On top of that, New York City is a crucial transportation hub, a global economic hub, the center, obviously, of the American financial industry, among other industries, and one of the world's most visited places. And for these reasons and more, New York is the most targeted city in the United States and one of the most targeted cities worldwide in terms of terror efforts directed against us. Since 9/11, we have thwarted 20 terrorist plots, and I want to give all credit to the men and women of the NYPD and all of our other agencies who've done this extraordinary work. 20 plots over 15 years, and that includes 4 in the past 2 years. And Mr. Chair, we've submitted this list to the committee of each and every one of those plots to give some context. We've also faced natural dangers, including Hurricane Irene, Superstorm Sandy, Ebola, and now the Zika virus. And we've safely hosted every year the UN General Assembly and papal visits, including the one most recently in September, and also annually major national events like the New Year's Eve celebration in Times Square. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, thousands of brave men and women are on the ground closely monitoring and pursuing every potential threat. But they can't do it alone. The Urban Area Security Initiative, or UASI, this funding is crucial to our continued safety. First, UASI helps us prevent terror. UASI funding helps employ the people who keep us safe, like the NYPD intelligence specialists who monitor incoming information all day, every day. And our new 500-plus officer Critical Response Command. This is a full-time counterterror force, highly trained, well-armed to deal with the challenges of today. UASI is also critical to developing and acquiring the technology that protects us in the world of 21st century threats, and that includes the Domain Awareness System, a web of 8,000 cameras and sensors linked to technology that can read license plates and detect radiation. It also includes the NYPD's counterterrorism helicopter that scans nautical vessels in our waters to guard against any nuclear devices, and you have images here to show you that helicopter. Second, UASI funds are also critical to our ability to vigorously respond to crises. UASI supports NYPD active shooter tactical training for 3,500 officers so they can confront gunmen like those who brutally attacked people in Paris at multiple locations. The New York City Department of Health uses UASI funding to identify and isolate diseases and bioterror. The Fire Department of New York City has deployed UASI funds to acquire a fireboat that can filter out chemical, biological, and nuclear contamination to allow personnel to work in the midst of an attack. We have an image of the fireboat there. So my message today is simple and urgent. We need the Congress to do its part to protect New York City and, in fact, all of the United States from security threats. That's why I'm deeply concerned about the proposed fiscal year 17 budget cuts to UASI. New York State has roughly $600 million in UASI and other funds from the fiscal year 14 and fiscal year 15 allotment, of which New York City received and spent about $311 million, about half of the allotment for New York State. Under the fiscal 17 proposal, we're facing a 50% cut across the nation, which would likely, of course, cut New York City's allocation in half as well, at a time when we're seeing more severe and more complex terror threats. We cannot reduce our commitment to public safety. We simply can't afford to stand back when these threats are becoming greater and more challenging. And remember, the effects of a catastrophe in New York City affect the entire nation. After 9/11, the Dow dropped over 600 points and the 2001 recession deepened. Before concluding, I want to note that NYC taxpayers are investing a great deal of their own dollars to fight terrorism. For example, city funds are equipping our 36,000 police officers with new technology they can use to receive terror alerts, essentially giving us 36,000 counter-terror officers at any given moment when we need them. We've always relied on the federal government to be a strong partner. We need that partnership to continue. It's essential not just for 8.5 million New Yorkers that call New York City home, but for all Americans. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this crucial matter.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your insightful testimony, and I can't agree with you more. And I'd also like to publicly commend you for the team that you've put together that protects our city every day. Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, Fire Commissioner Danny Nigro, and my good friend who accompanied you down here today, Joe Esposito, the head of OEM. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mayor de Blasio, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we've heard several reasons for the proposed cuts, one of which was the amount of money that has yet to be spent in prior funding. Can you talk about the money that's in the pipeline and how, while it may not have yet been spent and drawn down, that money's already been obligated for various projects that are vital for your efforts to secure our city?
Well, that's exactly right, Mr. Chairman. Remembering that we are now seeing more threats than ever before and more complicated ones, we continue to innovate. This has been something that all our agencies do, and Commissioner Bratton is particularly well known for constantly creating the concept of innovation in all we do in the NYPD, particularly in our counterterror work. That's why we came up with a new specially trained, specially armed counterterrorism group, the Critical Response Command. No city in America has such a developed apparatus at this point, and we need it because we're the #1 terror target. But the simple answer to your question is all dollars that have been provided are in the process of being spent. They have been obligated, as you said. We all know that the process of actually acquiring equipment, for example, requires a number of steps. We have to very carefully follow those steps under federal guidelines, and we do. But that often takes several years to be done properly. Every dollar is being spent, and being spent on the kind of things that will prevent terror. Remember, our first mission, of course, is to prevent terror. NYPD has done that successfully now for 15 straight years, warded off those 20 attacks I mentioned. But we also know if, God forbid, there was an instance of a terrorist attack, our job is to contain it and minimize it. That's why we put such an emphasis on active shooter training, on technology that would allow the fastest alert possible to our officers so they could intervene. And we need to keep making those investments so we're prepared. But the bottom line is every dollar that has been allocated in the past has been obligated, is being spent effectively.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Bratton has estimated that these cuts would cost an approximate amount of $90 million reduction for the funding to New York City for the police department. Could you explain to the committee what are some of the capabilities that the New York City Police Department would no longer be able to fund in the absence of the grant funding that's being proposed now?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We have a substantial domain awareness system, but we need to keep building on it as the threats intensify. If we did not have this funding, we would not be able to build out that domain awareness system further. We do have some explosive detection equipment, but again, we need to add to that capacity. One example I need to offer, in addition to all the other reasons why New York City is a target and why New York City is a challenging environment to protect and police. We just announced this week that we expect over 59 million tourists in the course of this year. It will be an all-time record. The amount of traffic, the amount of human intensity that happens on the streets of New York City every single day requires constant vigilance, and we need the technology to allow us to look for any and all threats. Finally, I would say, you know that as the area around the World Trade Center has come back to full life and economic vitality, and that is growing every day, we know that that site, sadly, remains a particular target of interest for terrorist forces. We need to add additional vehicle screening in that area. We would not be able to do that without the funds that we have traditionally received from UASI.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor. My time is running out, so let me just ask one final question. Secretary Johnson is testifying before our full committee tomorrow on the Department of Homeland Security's fiscal budget for fiscal year 2017. What message do you have for the Secretary about any proposed cuts?
I'll be seeing the Secretary later today. I have immense respect for him. He's been a great partner, but my message is we cannot protect New York City sufficiently without this funding. And I believe it's a fair national priority to protect our largest city and a city that is so central to our national life. And I would say to him that we in New York City invest heavily in counterterrorism ourselves. For every dollar we receive from the federal government, we spend one of our own dollars as well. We spend the taxpayers' dollars of our city to protect our people and all the people who visit. Those 60 million tourists, the 3 million people or so come into town each day to work during the week. We're definitely going to be shouldering a big share of the burden, but we need our federal partners to take their part in this effort to protect.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor de Blasio, New York City has benefited from significant Homeland Security grant investments, and rightfully so. What is your biggest fear if those programs are slashed?
My fear is we fall behind, Congressman, that we have, over the last 15 years since that horrible day of 9/11, innovated an approach to fighting terror, to preventing it before it happens. It has become a very refined approach and a very successful approach. It requires a close coordination of all of our city agencies, police, fire, emergency management, health, and others, but also close partnership with the federal government. I have to say, I think it's at an all-time high in terms of close cooperation and collaboration with FBI, Homeland Security, et cetera. But I think there's a phrase we use in New York City that describes the situation: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So far, we have succeeded in preventing terror on a consistent basis.
Absolutely.
But as we saw in Paris, as we saw in San Bernardino, the challenges are greater. It's why we created a standalone counter-terror apparatus, and why we need ever more commitment to technology and to a more refined approach. If the bottom drops out of that, if the leg is taken out of the stool, and we are no longer able to invest in improving our approach, sadly, we'll be creating vulnerability. So, Congressman, I would say if one day we believe that the terror threats around the world are actually declining, well, that would be a glorious day where we could talk about the opportunity to reduce spending. But unfortunately, right now, those threats are increasing. They're becoming more complicated. Law enforcement is challenged to keep up with the capacity of terrorist organizations and their use of technology, which is one of the areas we most need to combat them with. So I would argue we can't do that. We cannot perform that role or engage in that fight against terror effectively without this funding.
Thank you. And also the FY 2017 budget request cuts the UASI and the State Homeland Security Grant Program collectively by over $500 million. Port and transit security grants would also be cut. There is no question that those programs yield real security benefits. Meanwhile, the budget requests $49 million for counter-violence extremism grants. Though we have no idea what the program will look like or what benefit it will provide. In light of these uncertainties, what activities do you think CVE grants should support, and how can these programs be carried out in a way that avoids profiling?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. We do support the notion of the Countering Violent Extremism program. We believe that it is more important than ever for government at all levels to engage all communities, build partnerships, share information, create an atmosphere that's more positive and hopeful than it may have been in the past. We do not support profiling in any form. And as you know, we've changed the policies of the previous administration to both more effectively police, because we do not believe those policies were the best way to counter terror, but also because if we create inadvertently a rift with any of our communities, it actually impedes the flow of information from the grassroots. So I want to make sure it's understood we feel this about all communities, because there's different types of challenges and threats and different types of violence that could emanate from a variety of communities. But the common link is establish deeper communication and respect, bring law enforcement and community closer together, don't create a rift, and figure out the other things we have to do through government, whether it's in terms of education or efforts directed at young people to lift them up, that actually increase the security of everyone. So that core philosophy we believe in. Like you, we look forward to more elaboration of the concept from the federal government, but we believe in the philosophy.
Okay, thank you. I had another question, but in the interest of time, I will yield back, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to ask questions.
The gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize other members of the subcommittee for questions they may wish to ask the witness. In accordance with committee rules and practice, I plan to recognize members who were present at the start of the hearing by seniority on the subcommittee. Those coming in later will be recognized in the order they arrive. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Mayor, thank you for your testimony here today. And as someone who was born and raised in New York City, my father was in the NYPD for over 30 years. I really tremendously admire the work that's done by all of the city agencies, especially NYPD, Emergency Management, with our good friend Joe Esposito there, FDNY, with Dan Nigro. And the job that you have is one which I don't think any of us envy. It's, maybe it's great to march in the parades, but other than that, it's a lot of abuse and a lot of tension. Even though Ms. Rice and I represent Long Island, the fact is people should realize that Nassau and Suffolk counties, as well as Westchester, are all part of the UASI. It's New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, even parts of Rockland. And also we have to closely coordinate with Northern New Jersey. Whenever you go to any of the mock drills they have, you see how much coordination is involved. And also, as you said, New York City and the region, New York City region, is the #1 target in the country. And I think it's important for the rest of the country to realize the tremendous expense involved in that. I mean, you have well over 1,000 police officers working full-time in various types of counterterrorism. That also work with the state police, Nassau Suffolk police, working with the FBI and the JTTF. And it's a constant, really, state of war almost, at least a state of preventing a war. And so any cuts at all, to me, could be catastrophic to New Yorkers. I've been on this committee since the start, and I don't think it's any one method or any one line of defense that's going to stop an attack. When you need the multiple defenses out there, and you certainly train and hope that at least one of those is going to work, is going to stop the next attack. You don't know where it's going to be coming from. It could be Times Square, it could be the Brooklyn Bridge, it could be the subway system, it could be anywhere. And so I just think all of us on the committee should stand as one, not as Republicans or Democrats or from New York or from the rest of the country, realizing how vital this is, that the funding be continued. And also, I think it's important to realize that the NYPD or the FDNY or emergency management, when they're out there doing the job, that's really not a New York City function. That is it's a federal government's responsibility to protect local governments and local municipalities from being attacked. That is a federal responsibility. And so if you're carrying out a federal responsibility, at the very least, you should be compensated for the work that you do. This isn't a gift. This isn't charity you're getting. I mean, you are doing the work that the federal government should be doing. And the fact is, you're better equipped to do it in many ways. But again, to be shortchanging you at a time like this, when the ISIS threats have never been greater, when we still have Al-Qaeda, we still have Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and we have the self-starters. We have the people at home sitting in their apartment with the computer who can become radicalized. So I would just, again, give you the opportunity to expand on how essential it is that all of the city departments and the neighboring locales receive the funding they need on Homeland Security.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Congressman, let me also thank you at the outset and all of your colleagues. I know you played a particularly crucial role in finally passing the Zadroga Act, and I want to thank you for first responders in New York and all over America, and so many people were affected by 9/11. That was such a profound victory. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Mayor.
You said it perfectly in that every single one of our officers at any given moment, any day, could be involved in counterterrorism activity. And that means being aware that the smallest clue could lead to something much bigger. And that is why we put a big emphasis on training. So all of our officers are being trained to prepare for a variety of scenarios. That's why we need the active shooter training, because instantly there may be a crisis. It's also why we emphasize technology, that now we're able, with resources that we provide at the local level, to, for example, put a description of a terrorist, an individual, out to all 36,000 officers instantly, and now they're all at that moment looking for that individual. Or again, an officer may see something on the ground that indicates the potential of a threat that then alerts everyone else to go into action. So because we've been hit, we don't see this as an abstraction. We feel it very personally. We know this threat is very real because 20 times threats were attempted against us. We know that every one of our officers has to be vigilant at all times. So we will always pay our fair share. But I agree with your core point. For the federal government to step back and create a situation where a locality can't do all that is needed to protect against terror makes no sense at this moment in history. And it is such a pervasive threat that literally every one of our officers, and that extends, of course, to emergency management and fire as well, knows at any given moment they have to be involved not only in preventing, but, God forbid, responding to an incident.
Mr. Mayor, time has expired. Just would like to add, I want to make sure we maintain the unity here today. I do have some differences of honest difference with you and Mr. Payne on the whole issue of policing, but again, you guys are doing a great job. Today is not the day to bring that up, and just want to again thank you for what's happening. Let's stay united today. We've worked together on other issues. We'll do it on this, and I just want to put that on the record.
I thank you, and my door is always open, Congressman.
I know that well. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. King. The chair now recognizes the Congresswoman from New York, Ms. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo what my colleague Pete King just said. I mean, I think it's very clear that the federal government is responsible for protecting the homeland. New York City is the prime target in the homeland, and it's really that simple. So as someone who, like Pete, whose district is, we share a border with the city, and as a former homicide prosecutor in Brooklyn, I just want to extend this committee's full appreciation to you, Mr. Mayor, and to Commissioner Bratton and the men and women of the NYPD. You've done an extraordinary job making the city safer under your watch, and that's a good thing for all of our nearby communities, and for me personally, for all of the members of the NYPD who happen to reside out on Long Island in our district. So I want to ask a question that I think goes to security both in the city and locally in my district. And I'm talking about the ongoing dispute between Apple and the Justice Department. I'm troubled mostly by what I see as the unfortunately narrow stands that have emerged in what is and should be a complex debate. As someone who cares more than anything about our security, but also values deeply the privacy protections that allow us to live safely in the digital age, I wonder if The entrenched nature of this debate really does it justice. Does one side have to win and one side have to lose? Do we have to choose between being digitally safe or physically safe? Just your thoughts on that, Mr. Mayor.
Congresswoman, I think that's a fantastic question because I agree with you 100%. I think something's been missed here in this discussion. The companies involved, Apple and others, and their customers understandably want to protect their privacy, and that's an American value too. But I have to say I couldn't agree more with Director Comey and Commissioner Bratt and others who have said that if law enforcement doesn't have appropriate information to pursue terror threats and other violent crime, of course people will be literally physically endangered. So we can't have these two polar opposite sides staring at each other and not resolving the problem. What I hope there can be found is a third way, if you will, wherein the government has access to information in a way that is provided voluntarily by these companies, obviously always with a court order and an appropriate judicial process. But I think the companies do owe it to the nation to come up with a procedure for providing that information to law enforcement. I respect that they have some limitations that they're concerned about. I believe there is a reasonable process that can be determined to make sure that no piece of information that could stop violence is ever withheld, but at the same time respect privacy rights. I believe there is a compromise that could be struck. I think it begins with the companies stating their willingness to break out of the current paradigm and agree that they do have more power to help law enforcement, and that it does not implicitly mean that they would be giving up privacy standards. So that's what I hope we can all work on together, is a different approach that gets us to that very simple end goal, preventing violence.
I couldn't agree with you more, and has been proposed. In a perfect world, what would you be asking for if the funds were well, I shouldn't say the funds were unlimited because they're not, but maintain the status quo? Is that enough? Would you ask for an increase, slight, big? Give us some perspective.
Look, I'll state the obvious. The first is to protect the consistent funding we've received, because we've depended on it. We've bluntly assumed it would be consistent given the environment we're all working in. I think we clearly want to go farther and continue to innovate. I've talked to you about some of the areas that we need to do more on in terms of technology, for example. And so additional resources will help us do better. It's as simple as that. We want to continue this extraordinary work of preventing terror. It's in the interest of the entire nation. So clearly more resources would mean more technology, more training, more ability to stop terror, but at minimum, keeping consistent with previous funding. And I also want to say on the previous point, I thank you for standing up on the issue of the information that law enforcement needs. You understand as a former prosecutor. But I do ask of you and your colleagues, please stand up for all of us at the local level who are trying to prevent violence, and stand up for law enforcement. I'd like to believe this would be an area of bipartisan consensus. Let's work together to help those companies find an outcome that they can live with, but that still prevents violence.
Agreed. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. My colleague, Ranking Member Payne, had another question. If Mayor, you have time to entertain.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor de Blasio, I know that this isn't issued specifically within the scope of today's hearings, but I believe that it's related. First responders in my district, as well in New York, rely on T-band spectrum for radio communications. Unfortunately, the legislation that authorized FirstNet requires 11 jurisdictions, including ours, to relinquish the spectrum by 2023, unless Congress acts to extend the deadline. Can you share some of the concerns New York City's first responders have about their emergency communication capabilities in light of the deadline and the associated costs of transitioning off the T-band?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, I share your view. T-band is a critical part of the work we do in terms of emergency communications. Disrupting that reality could prove to be very dangerous. We have, as you know, a very highly developed apparatus in New York City to protect our people and protect, again, the 60 million people who visit every year. It has to do with a number of agencies constantly working together in a very crowded, complex environment. And the current communication structure allows us to do that work. If Congress doesn't act and we have to relinquish the current approach, we fear a situation that's really disruptive. And I think this is a case where there should be consequences otherwise.
Absolutely. We talk about supporting our first responders, and then we find situations where something like this potentially could occur. I mean, we have a saying in Newark: if you're going to be about it, stay about it. And so to change and disrupt that is very troubling. So we want to continue to support our first responders. We expect a lot of them, and they do the job, and so we need to give them the support they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for your valuable testimony and for clarifying for the members of this committee the hollow excuses of the administration that there's $600 million that New York City hasn't spent. I guess the administration doesn't know about bidding process, Vendexing, and everything else that we have to do back home to assure that the quality of the product we're purchasing and the preparation and the training that we need takes time. And as one of the 8.5 million people who lives in the city that you lead, I thank you for all you're doing to protect me and my family.
Chairman, can I make one final statement?
You sure can. You're my mentor. You can.
Mayor, you generously gave me credit for being involved in the Zadroga 9/11 Act. Ms. Rice was also involved. But I know you think Dan Donovan is such a nice guy. As soon as that bill was passed, he said, King, you were here for 14 years. You couldn't get it done. He was here 4 months and it passed. So he's taking all the credit for Zadroga. I think that should be on the record.
I would have arrived early if I knew he needed the help. Mayor.
That's right. You just should have asked, right? Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. And Chairman, thank you for your very generous statement. And I just want to thank you for your leadership. As I said, it is essential to the people of New York City that you're in this role, and obviously for all the people of this country. I want to thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Mayor. This panel is dismissed. The clerk will prepare the witness table for the second panel. Again, we thank you, Mr. Mayor, for all of your participation in this hearing.
Thank you.